A farmer from the Trans-Baikal territory could not even imagine that an ordinary morning would change his life. As he walked towards the barn, where he kept the cattle, he noticed something moving near the wooden wall. Looking closer, he saw tiny puppies, helpless, blind, obviously abandoned without a mother. One of them stood out. He was missing one paw. Their thick fur shivered from the cold. The farmer wondered where their mother was. Why are they so defenseless here? He suggested that the dog might have brought them closer to the home, but then disappeared. Realizing that the puppies would not survive without help, he carefully gathered them up and carried them into the house, wrapping them in a warm cloth. Taking care of such tiny puppies proved to be a challenging task. They had to be fed by Pipette, kept warm and monitored almost around the clock. Was especially difficult with the three-legged puppy. He seemed weaker than the others. The farmer quickly realized that without experience he could harm the babies. Having decided to seek help, he contacted the Dorian Nature Reserve. The staff offered to find a nursing mother who could take in the puppies, especially if she had recently had her own litter. It seemed like the best solution, but no one expected that the farmer's find would be unusual. When specialists from the Dorsky Reserve arrived to examine the puppies that the farmer had found near his barn, their reaction was stunning. They froze, barely looking at the tiny, shivering babies, and for a few moments they lost the power of speech. These creatures, which the farmer took for ordinary abandoned puppies, turned out to be not at all what they seemed at first glance. Before them were not domestic dog cubs, but wolf cubs, the most representative of one of the most mysterious and little-studied species of wild animals, living in hard-to-reach corners of the wild. Wolves, whose territories stretch across the vast forests, rugged mountain ranges and open steppes of the Trans-Baikal region, lead a secretive lifestyle, avoiding contact with humans and remaining almost elusive to researchers. Their thick, dense coat, perfectly adapted to the freezing winters, and their alert, penetrating gaze make them a symbol of wild freedom. But what made this find truly unique was the condition of one of the wolf cubs. He was missing one of his front legs, which seemed like an incredible miracle of survival in conditions where even healthy individuals face severe challenges. The three-legged wolf cub, despite his fragility, clung to life with amazing tenacity. His fur, as thick and fluffy as his brothers and sisters, hid his vulnerability, and his small eyes, not yet fully open, seemed to hold the secret of his incredible existence. Experts accustomed to working with wild animals could not believe that such a baby could survive without maternal care on a cold morning. Wolves are animals whose nature is radically different from their domesticated relatives. While domestic dog puppies can be affectionate, playful, and easily adapt to life with humans, wolf cubs, even at such a young age, already carry within them the indomitable spirit of the wild. They may seem harmless when they are still blind and helpless, but as they grow older, their instincts awaken with uncontrollable force. They become distrustful, avoid people, and their behavior becomes increasingly unpredictable, reflecting their innate need for freedom. This discovery caused quite a stir among the reserve's staff. Wolves are not just rare animals, they are a key part of the ecosystem, maintaining balance in the wild. Their lifestyle, habits, and behavior are still the subject of careful study, as these predators are masters at avoiding human attention. Meeting wolf cubs, especially one as unique as the three-legged one, was an event of exceptional importance. Experts realized that these babies, if raised properly and returned to the wild, could become part of a population already under threat from climate change, poaching, and loss of natural habitats. The three-legged wolf cub, despite his disability, was living proof of the incredible power of nature, capable of overcoming even the most difficult circumstances. A farmer standing nearby and watching the expert's reaction was amazed by their words. He, a simple man accustomed to taking care of his household, did not even suspect that his accidental find would turn out to be so significant. Experts explained that wolf cubs, especially such an unusual one as this one, are of great value not only from a scientific but also from a material point of view. On the black market, such animals fetch fabulous sums, hundreds of thousands of rubles, and sometimes more. Exotic animal collectors and underground traders are willing to go to any lengths to get their hands on a wolf cub, especially one with such a rare feature as a missing paw, which makes it a unique trophy. However, catching a wolf in the wild is an almost impossible task, and finding their cubs is an event bordering on a miracle. But at the same time, experts emphasized that keeping wolves in captivity is not just a difficult task, but a cruel intervention in their nature, which condemns them to suffering. This information made the farmer think. He realized that in front of him were not just puppies in need of warmth and milk, but creatures whose fate was linked to the wild. Wolves are not designed to live in cages or on chains. Even in zoos, where they try to create conditions as close to natural as possible, they often suffer from stress, illness, and the inability to realize their natural instincts. The three-legged wolf cub, despite his vulnerability, was a part of this wild essence, and his place was not in a human home, but among the forests and steppes, where he could, despite his peculiarity, try to survive, following the call of his ancestors. Stunned by the discovery that the puppies he found were unusual dogs, and the wolf cubs, one of which, three-legged, was a unique miracle of nature, the farmer stood surrounded by specialists from the Dorian Reserve, trying to comprehend the scale of his find. His mind was reeling with the new knowledge the experts shared. Wolves are not just rare inhabitants of the wild, but true guardians of the ecological balance, whose life in the hard-to-reach forests, mountains, and steppes of the Transbaikal territory is shrouded in mystery. Their secretive lifestyle, ability to survive in harsh conditions, and natural grace make them some of the most majestic creatures. The three-legged wolf cub, despite his physical peculiarity, was a living testimony to the incredible resilience and strength of nature, capable of defying even the most difficult circumstances. But along with his admiration for these creatures, the farmer had to face a moral choice that could change not only his life, but also the fate of these rare animals. The reserve staff, continuing to explain the significance of the find, mentioned that wolf cubs, especially such an unusual one as the three-legged one, are of great value on the black market. In a world where exotic animals become objects of desire for collectors and lovers of rarities. Wolf cubs can cost hundreds of thousands of rubles, and in some cases the price reaches millions. The three-legged wolf cub with its unique feature would be a particularly desirable trophy for those willing to pay fabulous sums to possess something unusual. Underground traders, poachers, and even some unscrupulous zoos often enter into deals to obtain such animals, despite the fact that capturing them from the wild is a labor-intensive and often illegal task. Wolves are masters at avoiding humans and their cubs, especially vulnerable ones like these, almost never fall into human hands. This chance find by the farmer was an event that could have been someone's chance for great wealth. The farmer was faced with a dilemma he had not even considered when he first noticed the wolf cubs shivering against the barn wall. He could contact intermediaries who would quickly find buyers ready to pay any price for the wolf cubs. The money earned from such a deal could have changed his life dramatically. He could repair his farm, buy new equipment, provide for his family, pay off debts, or even build a new house. For a common man living in the countryside and accustomed to daily work, such as some seemed almost unreal, like winning the lottery. A three-legged wolf cub as the main value could become the key to financial stability, which many only dream of. But the longer the farmer listened to the experts, the clearer it became that this path would not only be wrong, but also destructive for the animals themselves. Experts explained in detail that wolves, unlike domestic dogs, are not designed for life in captivity. Their wild nature, their instincts, their need for freedom and space make it impossible to domesticate them without serious consequences. Even at a young age, when wolf cubs seem cute, harmless, and dependent on human care, their behavior remains only temporarily malleable. As they grow older, their innate traits begin to manifest themselves more and more clearly, and they become distrustful, avoid contact with people, show aggression, or, conversely, withdraw into themselves, suffering from stress. The three-legged wolf cub, despite his vulnerability, was no exception. His physical condition made him even more vulnerable in captivity, where he would not be able to perform his natural instincts, such as hunting, exploring, or interacting with other wolves. Keeping wolves at home, or in private collectors' cages, is not just a difficult task, but a real tragedy for these animals. Experts shared stories about wolves that they tried to keep in captivity. Such animals often get sick, suffer from problems with their fur, teeth, and digestion, since their bodies are not adapted to artificial diets or limited space. The three-legged wolf cub, with his physical handicap, would be especially susceptible to these problems, as his movement and ability to adapt to captivity would be even more limited. In zoos, where they try to make conditions for wild animals as comfortable as possible, wolves still often show signs of depression, refuse food, or become aggressive because their soul belongs to the wild and not to artificial enclosures. The farmer, a man of simple but strong moral principles, began to realize that he was faced with more than just a choice between money and debt, but a question about the fate of living beings that should not suffer because of human greed. He remembered how the three-legged wolf cub, despite his weakness, looked at him with his tiny, barely open eyes, and there was something in that look that touched his heart. These wolf pups, especially the one born with this condition, deserved a chance to live in their natural environment where they could run, hunt, interact with other wolves, and be part of the ecosystem that their ancestors belonged to. Selling them would mean condemning them to a life in a cage, full of pain, fear, and deprivation, and for the three-legged wolf cub this could be an especially painful ordeal. At that moment, the farmer realized that no amount of money was worth the freedom and happiness of these animals. He could not imagine how these wolf cubs, who had just begun their lives, would be locked in cramped enclosures, far from the forests and steppes where they were destined to live. His heart told him that the only right decision was to entrust their fate to professionals who could provide them with a future in the wild. Without the slightest hesitation, he told the experts that he wanted to hand the wolf cubs over to the reserve so that they could grow up where they belong, among the trees, under the open sky, surrounded by the sounds of nature. This decision was not only an act of mercy, but also a manifestation of deep respect for the wild nature of which these wolf cubs were a part, including the small but incredibly resilient three-legged hero. Having made the difficult but deeply conscious choice to hand over the wolf cubs to the Dorsky reserve, the farmer felt relieved, knowing that he had done the right thing in preserving the freedom of these rare creatures, including the three-legged wolf cub, whose resilience had become a symbol of the struggle for life for him. Now the fate of the wolf cubs was in the hands of professionals whose mission was to preserve wildlife and protect such unique animals as wolves, whose existence in the Trans-Baikal territory plays a key role in maintaining the ecological balance. However, the process of rescuing and preparing the wolf cubs for their return to their natural environment turned out to be complex, multifaceted, and full of unexpected challenges. The reserve staff, realizing that they were not just cubs, but representatives of one of the most indomitable species, began their work with the utmost caution, striving to ensure that the wolf cubs not only survive, but also have the opportunity to become a full-fledged part of the wild, despite the unique difficulties associated with a three-legged wolf cub. The first and most urgent task was to find a nursing dog that could accept the wolf cubs as her own cubs. It was a process that required patience, experience, and luck, as not every dog is capable or willing to nurse other people's babies, especially wild ones, whose smell, behavior, and needs are different from domestic puppies. The three-legged wolf cub, with his physical peculiarity, presented an additional challenge. His limited mobility could make it difficult to access milk, and his weakness required special attention. Sanctuary staff contacted local farmers, animal shelters, and even neighboring regions to find suitable foster mothers. They understood that without mothers, milk, and warmth in the first weeks of life, the wolf cubs, especially the three-legged one, might not survive, since their immune system was not yet strong enough, and artificial feeding, although possible, could not completely replace natural nutrition. The days of searching seemed endless, and every hour counted. The farmer, who still felt responsible for the wolf cubs, regularly called the reserve to inquire about their condition. He couldn't forget how the three-legged wolf cub, despite his fragility, clung to life, and his heart sank at the thought that these little ones might not cope. Finally, after several 10 days, Luck smiled. In a neighboring area, 2 nursing dogs were found who had recently given birth to their own puppies. The dogs, known for their calm nature and maternal instincts, were brought to the reserve, where specialists began the introduction process with trepidation. They carefully placed the wolf cubs near the dogs, watching their reactions, ready to intervene at any moment if something went wrong. To everyone's amazement, the dogs accepted the wolf cubs, including Three-Leg, as their. They licked them, warmed them with their bodies, and fed them milk, making no distinction between their own puppies and wild foundlings. This moment was a real miracle. The three-legged wolf cub, who initially seemed the weakest, began to slowly but surely gain weight. His brothers and sisters, more active and strong, actively fought for a place near their mother. But the foster dog patiently cared for each one, paying special attention to the three-legged one, who, due to his peculiarity, sometimes lagged behind. The reserve's specialists monitored the process around the clock, regulating the temperature in the room, providing the dogs with nutritious food to maintain lactation, and monitoring the health of the wolf cubs. They carried out regular inspections, checking how the babies were gaining weight, how their sense organs were developing, and noting that the three-legged wolf cub, despite his disability, demonstrated an amazing will to live. His eyes gradually opened, and his movements became a little more confident, although he was still inferior to his relatives in dexterity. As the wolf cubs grew, their wild nature began to emerge more and more clearly. They became more active. Their tiny paws, even those of the three-legged, tried to explore the space around them, and their instincts made them react with caution to unfamiliar sounds or movements. They began hiding in corners, growling if anyone came too close, and even trying to play with each other, honing skills that would later serve them well in the wild. The three-legged wolf cub, although he moved slower, did not lag behind in these games. He found ways to compensate for his peculiarity, using balance and cunning. The experts watched this process with admiration, realizing that they were not just looking at animals, but at creatures whose nature prepares them for life in harsh conditions, where only the fittest survive. When the wolf cubs reached an age where they could eat solid food and not depend on milk, the reserve staff began preparing them for the next stage, returning them to the wild. It was a complex process that required careful planning. Wolves, unlike domestic dogs, cannot simply be released into the forest without training, especially those as young and vulnerable as these, with the three-legged wolf cub among them. Experts decided to equip the wolf cubs with special collars with radio transmitters to track their movements and condition after release. Special collar was developed for the three-lobed wolf cub, light and comfortable, so as not to restrict his already difficult movements. These devices would allow scientists to monitor how wolf cubs adapt to the wild environment, find food, avoid danger, and possibly integrate into a pack. The graduation day was an exciting event. The wolf cubs, now strong, with thick fur and alert eyes, were transported to a remote part of the reserve where human presence is minimal and nature provides everything the wolves need to survive. The three-legged wolf cub, although inferior to his relatives in speed, stayed close. His movements were full of determination. The experts, watching them from afar, felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. They knew that the wild nature was not only freedom but also severe trials, especially for such an unusual wolf cub. However, they believed that the care that the wolf cubs received in the first weeks of life gave them a chance to become part of the world for which they were born, and that the three-legged wolf cub, despite all the difficulties, would be able to find his place under the starry sky of Transbaikalia. The release of the wolf cubs into the wild is the culmination of an incredible story that began when a farmer discovered the tiny, shivering cubs near the wall of his barn in the Transbaikal region. Now these wolf cubs, including Treklopovo, whose steadfastness inspired everyone who followed their fate, stood on the threshold of a new life, a life full of freedom but also severe trials. The staff of the Dorsky Reserve, who watched with trepidation as they took their first steps into the forest, knew that this moment was not only their triumph, but also a test of how well they had prepared the wolf cubs for existence in the wild. The three-legged wolf cub, despite his physical peculiarity, moved with amazing determination. His eyes, now fully open, glittered with curiosity and alertness, reflecting the spirit of a true predator. However, the path to complete independence was full of challenges, and this story, which began with an act of mercy, ended with a profound lesson about the value of freedom and harmony with nature. The first weeks after graduation were encouraging. Signals from radio transmitters attached to the wolf cub's collars, including those specially designed for the three-legged one, were received regularly, allowing specialists to track their movements. The cubs, now young wolves, began to explore their new territory, the endless forests and steppes, where the rustling of the wind, the smells of game and the sounds of other animals created a complex but natural environment for their habitat. They learned to hunt small prey such as rodents first, and then tried their hand at more complex tasks. The three-legged wolf cub, although inferior to his brothers and sisters in speed and agility, demonstrated amazing ingenuity. He found ways to compensate for his missing paw, using balance, cunning, and teamwork with his fellow canines, who seemed to instinctively protect him, allowing him to remain part of the group. However, with the arrival of winter, when the temperature in Transbaikalia dropped to extreme levels and snow covered the ground in a thick layer, the life of the wolf cubs became a real test. Winter in these parts is merciless, food becomes rare, shelter is difficult to find, and the cold penetrates even the thickest wool. The young wolves, who did not yet have sufficient experience, faced difficulties that tested their endurance and instincts. The three-legged wolf cub, despite his resilience, turned out to be especially vulnerable. Its limited mobility made it difficult to travel long distances in search of prey, and the need to constantly maintain balance on three legs took more energy than that of its relatives. The signals from his collar began to come less frequently, causing alarm among specialists. Soon the signals disappeared altogether, and the reserve team suspected the worst. An urgent expedition was organized to find the wolf cubs. After a long search in the snowy forests, specialists discovered tracks that led them to a group of young wolves. Among them was a three-legged one, but their condition raised serious concerns. They looked haggard, their fur was dull, and their eyes, once full of energy, now expressed fatigue. The collars, including the one on the three-legged wolf cub, had been thrown off, perhaps in an attempt to get rid of the unfamiliar weight or due to natural wear and tear. The winter proved too harsh for the young wolves, who had not yet learned to effectively obtain food or find reliable shelter. Three-legged, despite his struggle, clearly suffered more than the others, since his physical peculiarity made every step in the deep snow a real feat. Realizing that without intervention the wolf cubs might not survive the winter, specialists decided to temporarily take them to a safe place. They set up a temporary enclosure in the reserve where the wolves could recuperate. They were provided with food, nutrient-rich meat to replenish lost energy, and warm shelter protected from the wind and frost. The three-flap wolf cub was given special attention. He was examined by veterinarians, making sure his health did not deteriorate and helping him adapt to the temporary conditions. This period became a kind of respite for the wolf cubs, allowing them to gain strength and prepare for their next attempt at life in the wild. Experts worked to minimize contact with people so that the wolf cubs did not get used to human presence and retained their wild instincts. With the arrival of spring, when the snow began to melt and the nature of Transbaikalia came to life, the wolf cubs, now significantly stronger, were ready for a new release. Their fur began to shine again, their eyes filled with energy, and their movements became confident. The three-legged wolf cub, although less agile than his relatives, demonstrated incredible adaptability. He learned to distribute his weight better, move faster over uneven terrain, and even began to show leadership qualities, sometimes directing his siblings during play. New collars, more reliable and lighter, were installed to continue tracking their progress. This time, the release took place in an even more carefully selected area of the reserve, where an abundance of game and the presence of natural shelters gave the wolves the best chance of survival. The following months brought good news. Signals from the collars showed that the wolf cubs, including the three-lobed one, had successfully adapted. They learned to hunt, find shelter, and avoid danger. The three-legged wolf, despite his peculiarity, became part of his small pack, where his unique skills, observation, and cunning helped in survival. Over time, the signals from the collars began to come less frequently, which experts interpreted as a sign that the wolves had fully integrated into the wild, perhaps joining other packs or creating their. Now they lived freely in the forests and steppes of Transbaikalia, strong and independent like their ancestors. This story, which began with the compassion of a simple farmer, shocked many. She became a reminder that wild animals like wolves are not meant to live in captivity. Some might wonder whether it was worth releasing wolf cubs, especially three-lobed ones, into the harsh wilderness when selling them could bring riches. But the farmer, looking at photographs of adult wolves, including the three-legged one, now confidently running across the steppes, knew that no amount of money was worth the freedom of these creatures. Life in a cage, even for such a unique wolf cub, would mean suffering, illness, and the loss of what makes a wolf, his wild spirit. Imagine if a three-legged wolf cub ended up in a collector's home, its fur would become dull, it would become aggressive or withdrawn, and its health would deteriorate due to stress and unsuitable conditions. Such experiments end tragically, and the farmer, having chosen freedom, gave the wolf cubs a chance to become part of their world. This story teaches that the true value of a wild animal's life is its freedom. The farmer didn't just save the wolf cubs, he allowed them to grow up, learn to hunt, become part of the ecosystem, and live the way nature intended. The three-legged wolf, who overcame incredible odds, became a symbol of the fact that even the most vulnerable can find their place in the world if they are given a chance. As the farmer looked at photographs of adult wolves running proudly across the steppe, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that his decision had preserved not only their lives, but also their dignity as part of the wild. Yes.